Hi, everybody. Welcome to Craft, Authors in Conversation. I'm Denise Kiernan. I am so excited to be here with Kim Ruehl, who's not just an amazing author and journalist and all-around great person, but somebody I am privileged to have as a friend. It's always pretty special when I get to have friends on here. For those of you who have not joined us for Craft before, this used to be hosted live and will again soon at the wonderful little Jumbo cocktail bar here in Asheville, North Carolina. We have a wonderful time. The co-owner and cocktail meister, Chall Gray, creates wonderful cocktails for folks, always creates a special cocktail for my guests on Craft. He has continued to do the same as we have moved into this virtual space during COVID, and we have a special cocktail coming up for Kim a little later in the hour. So, and as always, our bookstore of choice, our sponsor, so to speak, is Malaprops here in Asheville, North Carolina. I would strongly encourage you to buy Kim's new book, A Singing Army. You can actually get signed copies, which is a wonderful opportunity. How can you do that when we're doing this virtually? I shall tell you. So if you look at this little green button right down here, it says you can order books. If you click on that, it takes you straight over to Malaprops. Kim has already signed a bunch of books for them. And if you write them, no matter where you are in the world, Malaprops will get you a signed and autographed book straight out to you, shipped. What more could you want? So a very, very beautiful thing that you can get right here and not at some of those other places online where you might order books. I'm just saying. So yes, we're going to talk a little bit about writing and research and Kim's new book, A Singing Army. About halfway through, we will stop, present our cocktail, and we will open up. Well, the comments and questions are always open. So as you will see, you have chat over here on your right, and you can talk to each other. But if you have a question, it's best if you put it in the Ask a Question section, which is down there at the bottom. It helps me keep all the questions in one place so that I don't miss something as questions scroll through. If things come up during the conversation, Joe is lurking in the chat, and he will look things up and put in important links and all of that sort of stuff. I will send out a recap of this event later. I am lurking. I will send out a recap of this later. This event always lives in the archive on my Crowdcast page, also lives on my YouTube page. But yeah, that about covers it. Hi, Kim.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. I'm so excited. I'm so happy about this book. And I don't know if I'm one of the few people, but I'm one of the people who knows how long you have dedicated your energy and your life and your talent to the topic of Zilphia Horton. But before, and so I kind of feel like the theme of this evening is tenacity, which is one of my favorite things in the world. But so much of you as a person, as a journalist, as a writer, and so much of Zilphia has to do with music. And not a lot of people know, but I went to North Carolina School of the Arts for music myself. So music has been a very big big part of my life since I was a little wee thing. What are some of your earliest memories of music?
Oh gosh. Oddly, the first thing that came to mind when you said that was Peter and the Wolf. Which, my father was a musician. He played the violin and sang, and I think always wished that he had pursued that. But he, we were not tight. But the one thing that I remember about him is Peter and the Wolf that he would turn on and like act out for us. I was also playing piano when I was a little kid. My mother was a single mother. And so, and there were 4 of us with a single mom. So I think that it was probably a babysitting thing that she dropped us off at this woman's house, and we each got an hour-long lesson, or maybe 30 minutes, and she
Yeah.
got a few hours to herself. But that was how I learned how to play the piano, was because my mom needed a babysitter. And when it wasn't our lesson time, we were like in the other room playing Qbert on the Atari.
Oh my God, Hubert, I love it. There is something about we didn't when I started playing piano when I was very young. I didn't have lessons, but my next door neighbor, one of my mom's best friends, she was a piano teacher, and her kids didn't want to learn to play. And I was obsessed and had just been playing constantly. And so she would let me come over and she would just teach me, and she would kick her own children out of the living room so that I could have lessons. And then anytime I wanted to practice, she would kick her kids out. And it was such a place of just kind of calm and focus for me. But it's also such an incredible means of communication, I think. So for you, I know for me, and I still play today, I have a piano here. I went on and studied flute. I have recently taught myself ukulele, but it's such a safe and comforting place for me to go, but it's also a really great means of communication and relating, I think, between groups of people who wouldn't necessarily connect. How did you go from being interested in music as a child to getting into music journalism?
I chased the dream as a songwriter for for all of my 20s into my 30s. I was touring and playing as much as I could and trying to write the perfect song. But sometime after, I was in New York for 9/11, and that was a big, awakening to my own mortality and meaning of life stuff. And I sort of had realized that I wasn't interested in all the stuff it took to make it as a performing musician. I loved making music with my friends and writing music, but the music business was not where I wanted to be. I didn't want to do all that stuff. So a friend sort of talked me into, convinced me that writing is a skill that not everybody has.
Come on. Who said that?
And I had, I was an English major, and I wrote some initially right after college, I wrote a few novels and sort of thought maybe that I wanted to write fiction, but music was just bigger. And so I started writing for a living around 2003. And, just sort of as a curiosity of maybe I could do this, maybe it would be fun, but it was a lot easier to get work as a writer than it had ever been to get work as a musician.
Easy to get work as a writer is not something we often hear, but keep going.
I know. Well, I was focusing on folk music, which is a niche, writing in a niche is it was a good one for me. So, it just sort of, one thing led to another, and I eventually stumbled onto Zilphia and became obsessed, and that became sort of my pet pursuit on the side of my job that paid me.
No, it's interesting because you talk about pursuing music, and I think so many times with creative pursuits, whether it's writing or music or visual arts or acting, whatever, there is an element of the expression of the art that really speaks to you, but the lifestyle that goes along with it doesn't necessarily work. So making the shift from music to writing felt a little more tenable for you in a sense?
Yeah, I'm not actually very extroverted, which, as a performer, you have to be on all the time. I'm much better in a room by myself. So it works a little better. Yeah. And it just, and really all the questions and and curiosities that drive me in my life really are much better suited to writing much longer things than verse, chorus, verse, you know.
Sure. Tell us how you came across the story of, I mean, first of all, I want to thank you for writing, like sticking to this project and writing this book, because I really do think her story was at risk of being lost, really. And your dedication to her story, I think, is actually a gift to American letters. But so tell me how you first came across her and what kind of grabbed you, because we'll get into like how long you've hung with this, and it was not like a piece of cake road for you. I know that. So how did you first come across her?
I was working on a project for my folk music reporting job, writing the histories of movement songs and, you know, individual folk songs. Just these little histories, you know, 500 words or something. And I just kept running into her name alongside all these people like Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger and Joe Glazer and Joe Hill and, you know, these men who dominated the 30s and 40s in folk music, whose work I knew very well. And I just became curious about, like, who was this woman? Did she know these guys? You know, what was her story, and why have I never heard this before? And so I would periodically, over a course of a couple of years, Google her and to see if anybody had written anything yet. Nobody had. And so I finally, you know, listened to Toni Morrison, who said that, you know, if there's a book you want to read that doesn't exist, you should write it.
Always got to listen to Toni.
Got to listen to the Queen.
Always got to listen to Toni. Yeah. I've talked about before with things I've worked on that if I wasn't in a particular place, in a particular situation, especially with the Girls of Atomic City, if I hadn't been living so close to Oak Ridge, I probably would not have necessarily pursued the story because it was just so accessible to me. You literally moved from Seattle to Asheville, North Carolina, to look further into this story. And as writers, a lot of times, you know, we talk about how do you know a story is right for you? How do you know this is a story you want to hang with? What is it about a story that makes you decide, yes, this is the one I'm going to pursue? Were you kind of going on a lark, or did you think, no, I have to get this done? Because a cross-country move is, you know, that's
a big deal. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I had no intention of moving here. Like, I came here to be close to Highlander, and I thought I would go hard on research for a while and then go back to Seattle and finish.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry to interrupt. Talk just for a minute about Highlander Folk School.
Right. So Highlander, oh gosh, for a minute.
I'm sorry. I know, right? Yeah, just that in a minute.
So Highlander Folk School was founded in 1932 by Miles Horton and Don West as an experiment in popular education to try and get poor Southerners together to talk about their problems and try and brainstorm solutions. And initially, the solutions they came up with were labor unions, because they were in the industrialized South and people were exploited. And over the years, because of Jim Crow, they sort of migrated into working on civil rights stuff. After Martin Luther King was assassinated, they've migrated into Appalachian land use and environmental issues, and now they're working on immigrant things and Black Lives Matter. And, you know, it's still around. It's been around for 89 years. And it was originally in Monteagle, Tennessee, outside of Chattanooga. And now it's in Newmarket, outside of Knoxville, Tennessee.
Okay. So back to what you were saying about coming here to look into Highlander.
Well, at that point, Zilphia had been like knocking on my door for 4 years. And it just felt like, okay, this is not going to go away. I'm not going to be satisfied with what exists in the world on this woman. And I have no idea what this story is or if there even is one, but I was single and had no reason to not go after this, not uproot my life and do this. So I did. And immediately, I mean, within the first week of being here and really actively digging, I was like, oh, there's a lot here, and it's going to take me a long time to piece it together. So yeah, I mean, it was immediate. I never regretted leaving Seattle. I mean, I miss Seattle still 10 years later, but I never regretted that move.
It is, I mean, it is a long time. And so this book is incredibly detailed and well researched, and it's a combination of archival research and personal interviews. So talk a little bit about how you decided to, because a lot of times, you always hear people saying, this is an untold story, this is an untold story. Well, some stories that are untold, nobody, they just remain untold. But some, I mean, you have these people like Zilphia who were, you shine a light on this and you think, oh my God, this woman was a key part of so much social justice, so many touchstones in American, so many touchstones in American culture. It's one of those things where you scratch your head and you go, oh my God, why don't I know more about her? How do you start with someone's life who was not a big name? Like, how do you start to go in and find out what you need to find out about someone like that?
Right. Well, I was lucky that Highlander still exists, and I was able to pretty easily discover that Guy and Candy Carawan, who are folk singers whose names I knew, were still alive and living there and working there. And so I contacted them to ask if they knew anything, like if they could point me in any direction. Yeah. And Candy wrote me back pretty quickly to say yes. I'm happy to help. There's definitely a story. Come to find out, Candy had done her own research years ago, and had amassed a good bit of research that was really helpful to me. But yeah, so I mean, the first place I went was Highlander, and they gave me some contacts. I mean, they're in the business of movement building, so it behooves them to have everybody's phone number. So they, were able to give me a handful of phone numbers, people to start with who actually knew Zilphia and were close with her. And
were they happy to talk about it? Were they interested in sharing the story?
Yeah, pretty much immediately. Like it seemed to me like everybody was just waiting for somebody to come asking about Zilphia. Yeah, I mean, they knew that she was important, and they were getting up there in age, so they were happy to share what they knew.
Had any of these folks done oral histories, or was there, what was the archival piece of this? Because I know you spent time at the Tennessee State Archives.
Tennessee and Wisconsin. Yeah, it was a lot of letters, lots and lots of letters, a few thousand letters between Zilphia and few thousand letters with Zilphia and all of the people that she collected songs from, and then about 1,000 letters between her and Miles, because they wrote to each other every day and they were often apart. And then there was the Highlanders papers, which were meeting notes, really like meticulous notes that Miles took that were sort of mundane, boring, but there were little gems, you read for 8 hours and you're like, oh, here's Eleanor Roosevelt.
I mean, that's the thing about research, right? I mean, you can spend 8 hours looking through a bunch of stuff and you get one sentence or two sentences, but they make all the difference. But you did so much research for so long. How do you start to winnow down that amount of material to to a story? Did you start out with an idea of what you wanted the arc of this story to be, or as you gathered all of this material, both real time from people who were living and also archival, did something else emerge that kind of surprised you? How did you shape that? Because you did so much research and you couldn't include, everything.
No, I mean, I could have researched, I mean, as it goes, you could research one subject for your whole life and not learn it all. Yeah, I mean, originally I thought it was going to be a story about this handful of songs and this woman who brought them into the world, which is a very narrow view.
But also very interesting.
Also very interesting.
Yeah.
But the more I learned about her, the more I realized that no, it needed to, her story deserved to be told in its entirety. And so narrowing it all down and sort of creating a narrative was just a lot of time. I mean, it was just brain cogs turning. And a lot of talking with her daughter, Karis, who was very good. She, has been a film producer and was sort of got the big picture of like getting into a story and was willing to talk me through a lot of it. We spent a lot of time on the phone. Yeah, I mean, it was talking it out with Karis and Anne Ramasco, who was Zilphia's best friend, who unfortunately died a couple of years ago. Never got to see this finished. But she was an invaluable resource as well.
In talking with Zilphia's daughter in particular, a lot of times when you are dealing with the descendants of a subject, they can, in a sense, you were very fortunate she was a filmmaker, she was a storyteller, because descendants understandably can get particularly attached to the legacy, what the story should be, what they want said about who their mother, father, grandparents were, often kind of shying away perhaps, or not necessarily wanting to kind of shine a light on all of those things that just sort of make us human. Was there a challenge there? Was there any sort of kind of, wanting to present Zilphia only in a certain light, or was there this understanding of a fellow storyteller that, you got to go where you got to go?
Yeah, I mean, at some point, we had a frank conversation about that, and she said, you have something you want to say, and nobody would understand that better than Zilphia. So, do what you got to do, and however it turns out is how it turns out, and we'll be thrilled that it's better than not having anything, And I think part of that is they grew up at Highlander Folk School. Their father has been trumpeted as this almost like a guru of social movements. There's, like she said, I knew Martin Luther King, I knew Rosa Parks, and I've never read anything about them that got it right. So, whatever history means is false, is really about somebody's understanding or interpretation or analysis of the situation. So say what you have to say, and hew as close to the facts as you possibly can, but you can't, you're not going to get it right. You're not going to, it's not going to be perfect.
It's constantly being, yeah, I mean, the more we learn, the more we understand, the more it's constantly being recontextualized, really. I mean, the more information you get, the more you look back at what we thought we knew or what we knew at the time, and you add new layers to it. It's and in that respect, what do you, I feel there's so many kind of, modern day, there's a modern day relevance to who Zilphia Horton was and what she represented and what she did. What is her 21st century kind of relevance feel like to you? Because I feel as though in this moment, who she was and what she did and how she communicated, especially through music, I think is really quite poignant.
Yeah, and I think, the closest thing I can think of is the Poor People's Campaign, which is really carrying on that idea of, um, you know, economic justice and, um, as a root of racial injustice, the idea that, if you make the poor white man feel innately more powerful than the poor black man simply by the color of their skin, then you can keep everybody in their place. So, I think she would be involved with that now. And when I look at, what's happening in the world in terms of organizing, that seems like where her work is happening the most, as well as at Highlander. I mean, they're certainly carrying on her legacy, and with the work that they're doing now, I think for a long time, all the other reporting about Highlander is super focused on Miles and his original vision,
Yes.
and which he deserves. But nobody ever said, hey, this is amazing what you built, but what did your wife have to do with it? And I think that is something that the leadership at Highlander over the last 10 years of that I've seen has become more and more curious about Zilphia and Septima Clark and the women of Highlander, and what incredible roles they played, and how vital it was, how Miles couldn't have pulled any of it off really without them. Which is always, it's always where women fall in history.
It's
About that.
Yes, I mean it's a little bit. Um, it is very interesting that a place so dedicated to moving the culture forward is wonderful, that it's embracing its need to re-examine people like Zilphia and the roles that they played. And it's so fantastic that they are looking more into her legacy and everything that she's done. And of course, a lot of that is thanks to you. This has been kind of a hard road as a writer. For this, did you ever think about, fuck it, I'm out. I've had
Totally.
it. Yeah. I mean, because honestly, it's, we do get, we do get people who, watch and comment and are working on their own projects, or have people who are children, friends who are interested in doing their own projects. And it can seem as though when someone like you is here and you have this wonderful book, and that, oh, look at her, must have been just it's so easy for her, but it was not easy for you. And I don't know what kept you what kept you going. I'm asking because we all go through like, oh my God, what am I doing? Did you ever question the choice to focus on this, or did you just think, I have to get this out here no matter what?
Yes, to all of that.
Not an either or, actually, I realize, but I mean, just having, and this is probably, compared to other people I've interviewed, it's a little different because I've seen so much of what you've stuck with, which is, it's a lot, which is why it's so wonderful this is in the world, but it's a lot to hang in there when you feel like, God, is this ever going to see the light of day? As a writer, it's hard, and we have, a lot of writers who are trying to, there's this feeling, I think, in this, in this sort of instant gratification world we're in right now, that, well, my gosh, I've been working on this for a year,
Right. Yeah, I mean, there were certainly a lot of times where I thought, I'll just stop doing that. Or, actually my wife Mercedes would occasionally say, you could just not write the book. It hasn't existed.
Hi,
and the world's been okay. And every time she'd say that, it was like a relief just to hear that said, but then to have it immediately followed by the thought of, are you kidding me? Like, I can't not, this story, this she deserves to have her story told. I mean, it was such the reason that nobody knows it is so dumb. And and
Well, it
I,
is.
it
I mean,
just
you think,
feels right to fix that, you know?
yes, and I think it's interesting that I love that Mercedes was like, well, you don't have to do this, because that's true. You don't have to, which then makes it about choice.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's a much more powerful place from which to approach a creative pursuit, especially.
Mm-hmm.
I am choosing to do this. I am choosing whatever this takes. I am choosing to do this. And it is insane when you think about songs like, what songs like We Shall Overcome and This Little Light of Mine, what they mean. We don't even think about why we know those songs or what made them resonate in American culture. And it is kind of crazy. It's what I love about this book is you read A Singing Army and you're like, oh my God, why don't we know this? It's such a big part of who we are as Americans. And you can really see her relevance in 2021 almost like more relevant in 2021 probably than when you started working on this story in a lot of ways, or at least equally as relevant, if not more. And what is it going to be like? It's always sort of hard when you end a project that you've been involved with for so long. What is life gonna be? I mean, you'll never be without Zilphia, but what is, it's definitely like the end of, writer Kim Ruehl era of the Zilphia years, right? Isn't it? Is it a bit of a goodbye? And has it been a little weird?
I mean, it was when I handed in the final draft, Now I'm like, okay, the next thing, because it takes so long to finish, to get to the book. So yeah, I mean, there was when I hit send on the final, that was sort of that moment. And now I'm past that, because I love this story and I love this community and all the people that I met who are so incredible. And I think about like going back to all those men and imagining Zilphia in that room, and the question at the beginning of like, which I think anybody who's been the first at something or one of the first women in a room of men, or one of the few women in a male dominated industry has experienced that, like, you are yourself in that moment, but you're also all the stories and experience that you have that none of those men have, And so the big question was, what were the stories and experiences that she brought into that space? That was really what hadn't been told. It wasn't just Zilphia, it was like all that stuff. And I feel like, okay, that's not untold anymore. And I can find the next untold thing.
It's not about just Zilphia and her untold stories. It's now about Kim Ruehl and all the untold stories she's bringing into space. Right?
I feel like we should sing now.
Yes.
That's a good song. Like if this were a musical, we would break into song now.
Okay, so we're gonna get to this is awesome. We're gonna get to questions, but first, I mean, I don't want to forget because sometimes I almost forget. Let me find Kim's cocktail, brought to us by Little Jumbo. Chall Gray, co-owner, mixologist, all-around spectacular person, has created this for Kim. Zim Zala Bim. And I love that this has, and I know this, I love that one of the ingredients in this cocktail is Saint-Germain, because if I remember correctly, that's actually one of your favorite liqueurs, is it not?
It is indeed, yes.
The elderflower, yes.
Yes,
So
indeed.
this is the wonderful cocktail, Zim Zala Bim. Thank you, Little Jumbo and Chall. And this will be, of course, in the recap that goes out later this week. But that is there for you, Kim Ruehl. And
Delicious.
yes, it is delicious. So let's look down at some of these. Let's look down at some of these questions and see what we got. Oh, that's a good one. Okay, how did this? Because I am a huge believer. I was talking about this in the last craft with Leslie Lair about structure. I'm a big believer that structure really helps guide readers through a story. So Lauren asked, how did the structure of this book change as you continued to, as you wrote and researched and edited? That's a great question.
It changed constantly. I know that you're a big fan of outlines.
Certain kinds of outlines. It's not,
Yeah.
I sometimes worry that when people say outlines, they think of like MLA, high school, Roman numerals. I'm like a conflict and resolution outline person. But I do get very, that's how I designate what the outline does. But I do get very detailed. And it might go all the way out the window. But anyway, go ahead.
I tend to write and then delete most of it, and then write more and delete most of it, and write more and delete most of it. So, you know, I had a basic, like I said originally.
An outline doesn't stop you from doing that, by the way.
No, I know, but the only way I can organize my thoughts is to start writing. Like there's no organization until I can write myself far away from the beginning. So, you know, like I said, originally I thought it was going to be about these songs, and that went out the window immediately. But I knew that I had to drill into We Shall Overcome, and I had to drill into at least a few others. So that, you know, that stayed in there.
Did you ever think about organizing the book according to songs?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that didn't really fly.
It's a good idea, but yeah, it would be hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it sort of it evolved all the time. I mean, what was the actual question again? How did the structure change?
How did the structure as you because you know 10 years you've been looking at this. So how did the structure evolve as you did more writing and research and editing?
Yeah. It just, you know, I wrote a million drafts, and, you know, each one, the structure changed. It's a hard question to answer.
It is. It's, do you find do you go all the way through to the end before you go back and edit, or do you edit as you write?
No, I'll usually will do a chapter and then edit, and then try and figure out like what is the next step, and then often would, you know, get 5 chapters down and then be like, oh wait, that was the wrong step, and have to go back and I write my way through. I mean, that's how my brain organizes.
Do you have a particular software or technique that do you ever do by hand? Do you have certain things that you like to use when you write?
Yeah, I did a lot in separate Word documents for a long time because I needed to just see a totally blank screen. And then, you know, at a certain point where I felt like I had a grip on what I was doing, I moved to Scrivener.
Yeah.
And organized everything there. And I had a lot of paper that I made notes on and stuff like that, like copies of letters and copies of interviews and stuff, and all my transcriptions. And every, you know, few months or so, I would print the whole thing out and read it in paper and make notes and then go back. It's sort of a messy, you know, it's hard to.
No, when I edit on paper always.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something, there's something about it being on the page that helps me look at pacing, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Okay. once you did the research, did the book write itself in any sense? Or was it similar, or was it a struggle to put it together in a coherent way?
It did not write itself, partly because there was a lot of mythology around her because of how she died and how
which we're not going to talk about because people have to read to find out.
Yes, but she died. I'm sorry to break it to you.
No, she died, but they don't get to know how. They have to
right.
It's very interesting.
So,
but it's interesting. Yeah.
So there was a lot of mythology. She told a lot of exaggerated stories. Miles, burned a lot of stuff at some point. So some things were lost, and so there were these big gaping holes in the source material, and so there was no way it was going to write itself, and there was a lot of like puzzle piecing things together. Which is where Karis came in, me texting her on a random Tuesday, like, did this lead to that, and checking out the assumptions. Yeah.
Somebody asked about a fire recently. Were there meeting notes and other things that at Highlander, were there resources and archives that were actually lost? And talk a little bit about the fire.
Yeah, so the office, Highlander, is on a hillside outside of Incorporated New Market. It's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And so there's a bunch of buildings. There's dorms, there's a library, there's the meetings hall, the office is separate houses that people live in. And so the office building was burned down about almost exactly a year ago. And it was, deliberately burned down by people who disagree with the school. That's not known for certain. The investigation is ongoing, but
it was worth investigating.
Yeah. And Highlander has been under fire from its people who oppose its mission for the entirety of its existence. People have always been trying to attack the school. And it was the office, so it was a lot of people's offices, whatever they had in their desk drawers, but there was part of the archive in there. And it was stuff that had to do with the civil rights era, which was after, most of it was after Zilphia was gone. And the rest of the archive was housed in the library, which was untouched. So a lot of that stuff got saved and sent to other locations. I don't know the specifics of what was lost, but it was definitely meeting notes and other pieces of the 60s, really consequential stuff.
What did the Tennessee archives have that, because I know you went there a few times, what did they have there? That's a wonder. I've gone there myself for research. It's a wonderful facility there in Nashville. What did they have that you were looking into there?
They have the Zilphia Horton folk song collection, so it's mostly focused around her 1939 songbook, and it's very specifically about the songs that she collected, and her correspondence with a lot of music people. But the bulk of what I collected was either at Highlander in the library, so it still exists. Or it was in Wisconsin as part of Miles Horton's papers. There's sort of a sub archive of Zilphia's stuff that's quite large. And yeah, so that was, Highlander meeting notes, and then Miles's personal stuff and Zilphia's personal stuff.
There is a question. What do you think Zilphia would think about the way that people tend to pigeonhole folks who live in Appalachia in a certain way? What do you think Zilphia would think about that?
That was, she really loved everybody except people like that.
Yeah.
She had some choice words for, I think imbecile showed up a few times to describe people who look down their noses at the dumb Southerners. Yeah. She did not like those people.
Can't you imagine? I mean, can't it to me, it's so easy to imagine her today looking at what's going on and the way people tend to how easy it is to be polarized and to live in your own echo chamber. And she wasn't about the echo chamber. She wasn't about just constantly talking to people who fed you what you wanted to hear. She was about creating, she was about fostering dialogue, really. I mean, I often wonder what you would do with that kind of energy, that kind of commitment, and that perspective, in April of 2021.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she would have been on Twitter.
Right.
I mean, maybe
know.
she would have seen it as an opportunity to foster collaboration. I don't know. But one point that I always think about is in those early days when there were people that came for labor, or in the 40s when they first started having integrated meetings or integrated residential sessions, because they had integrated meetings since 1935, which is pretty stunning in Jim Crow South. But
yeah, sure, of course.
But starting in the 40s, they were having integrated weeks-long sessions where people would sleep together in a dorm room and eat together at a table in defiance of Jim Crow. And there would be people who would come to those sessions and say at the closing circle, when I came here, like back home, I'm in the Klan, and I came here, with all these assumptions, and they've been challenged, So there were people coming who were, by the way, back home in the Klan, and there were people who were coming who, by the way, back home were in the NAACP. And they were there living together for 6 weeks. And some of them would get angry right away and leave. But for the people who stayed, and Zilphia had them in a room and had them eating together and singing together and dancing together. Which is,
yes, again, yeah.
Was big.
Yeah. Dancing was big then, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big deal.
And so I just think of her sort of intellectual curiosity about, how can we get these people to connect and collaborate when they are, everything in their life says they hate each other. But they're just people. We're all just people. And so that's, to me, has been really illuminating over the last few years, thinking, looking at sort of people who are opposed to things I believe in, and trying to think of them in the way that Zilphia, trying to see her view of that, and understand that, like, the only response to that is compassion, and to try and find a way to talk to each other, because, we shall overcome is about me and them, in the beloved community that Martin Luther King envisioned of everybody being welcome and no discrimination. They're as welcome as I am, theoretically, in the goal of liberation or whatever. And that's hard to wrap your mind around.
Sure, of course.
When people are getting killed, or whatever.
Coming at things from a place of curiosity as opposed to immediate judgment.
Right.
It's embracing the curiosity is challenging, like you said, in times when people are
curiosity and love.
And love
and compassion,
and empathy. Yeah, curiosity and empathy for sure. It's so still see these lessons continue to be valuable. And Joe is wondering what's next, which I almost don't want to ask because writers hate getting asked that question. But Joe asked, so get mad at him if you don't.
I won't say what I'm.
Yeah.
I won't say what I'm working on now, but I will say that there's this Bob Dylan project
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes, of course.
that that I worked on for a while that is actually releasing next month. The timing, it just worked out that way. So it's a book called The World of Bob Dylan. And I wrote a section about Dylan's influence on American roots music, and it's very exciting. It's a really deep dive into Bob Dylan's world and how everything in the world has been impacted by Bob Dylan, which everything has, in a very different way than everything has been impacted by Zilphia Horton.
I love it. I almost don't want to say this because it sounds like I'm lying, but I could actually run upstairs to my room because it's still tossed on my bed. I was wearing my Bob Dylan and his band. I was wearing that t-shirt today, actually.
Nice.
I was wearing my Bob Dylan t-shirt today. That's super exciting. Where can we find that? Well, this, again, a singing army, Zilphia Horton and the Highlander Folk School. You can get wherever books are sold. We encourage you to get it from independent bookstores. And if you want signed copies, click the little green button and you get it from Malaprops here in Asheville, North Carolina. But it doesn't matter where you live, they'll ship it out to you. Where can we find news about the Bob Dylan project?
World of Bob Dylan, it comes out on his 80th birthday, everywhere you can buy books.
Great.
Great.
May
24th.
Okay. And where can folks keep up with you? And we will put all of this, by the way, in the recap that I'll send out. But where do you like to be contacted? Where do you spend most of your time online?
I spend most of my time on Instagram. Twitter's second. Depending on the week, I go back and forth between which is my favorite. Or you can go to kimruehl.com. That's my internet world. Kim Ruehl writes on Instagram, or Kim Ruehl at all the other socials.
Okay. And yeah, that's it. Let me make sure. I think I got to all our questions. What is the next book? Most people think of it. Yes, I did. Okay. Thank you, not just for joining me. I mean, thank you for joining me. Thank you for sticking it out and doing this book. It's such an important book. I'm so glad it's in the world. Many people are going to be glad it's in the world, and will be used for years to come for future. I think it's going to be just a huge stepping stone for future research projects, writing projects. So just yay!
Thank you so much.
And yes, no, and I can't wait to see what's next. And it's great to have you. And thanks everybody else for joining us. We will be back April 14th with Dr. John Torres, aka Dr. Disaster, who's going to tell you how to survive everything. NBC's chief medical correspondent. Should be a lot of fun. But I will send out the recap. It will include Kim's fabulous cocktail recipe. And support your local bookstores, support your local writers, support your local Zilphia Hortons. They're out there. They're doing their stuff today, constantly, always. And let's raise them up. And let's stay curious. That's how I want to end tonight. Let's just stay curious.
Stay curious.
And
compassionate.
Stay curious and compassionate.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
everybody. We'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.